this morning as you are as we enter into our second week of this. This is our Lenten series. Probably a good Sunday to confess that Lent is actually 6 weeks, and we're doing a 4-week series calling our Lenten series. But at NBUC we just feel people are quick learners here, so we'll be all right. Yeah, but it is a good time, Lent, to really be intentional about our Christian life and to use it as a time to spiritually prepare for Easter. And that's why many people in the past have had traditions where they give up something, maybe give up chocolate or maybe add something in like prayer or scripture reading or a time of quiet on a daily basis as we move towards Easter weekend. I would just encourage us, we would encourage us to be creative what we do that works for us. I did some research this week, and there's some creative ideas on what people do for Lent. I was really quite amazed. Here's just a few, just for some fun in some ways. One was, don't eat your last bite of food. Well, that really depends on what food it is, how hard that might be. It just depends. One was, don't use utensils. Our boys would love that one. They practice it quite regularly already. This one was interesting. Give up texting and call whoever you need to talk to. Wow, that would be a lot of phone calls. And I'm not sure if people on the other end would want me to do that, but just different ways to think about it. This one was interesting. Wear the same 4 outfits for all of Lent. So I have to confess, one of my friends, I told that, said, well, that would expand yours from 2 to 4. And this is one too good not to say. This was a tweet that was out there. Giving up coffee and alcohol for Lent. It's going very well so far. #day1. So whatever you choose to do, may it be a time where we get ready for this amazing weekend called Easter. We celebrate the cross, the death of Christ, and the resurrection of Jesus that continues to bring life to us and to this world. Today we're talking about letting go of shame. Last week, if you're around, it was letting go of fear. Next week will be letting go of anger, and then letting go of bitterness the week before Easter. Letting go of shame. I would love to tell you this morning that I really struggled to find some personal stories for this one. But man, it wasn't hard at all. Thinking back to my past, thinking about the last 24 hours, the good news, hopefully, is that this is a very real and relevant topic for us this morning. So as we enter in, may we find God's grace and the Holy Spirit in this place today, because it's a deep one, it's a real one, it's relevant. I get that. I've experienced that this week myself. One of my stories went back to a number of years ago when I was in high school, and we were playing in the city finals. I grew up in Oshawa, and so our high school, Eastdale, was playing against O'Neill, and O'Neill was always the school. They were the school in the city that always won all of the championships, just the way it was. But this year, we really felt this was our year. We had a team that had a chance. And so, when the game came, there was hype, there was talk, there was conversation. And if you remember back, there was this movie called Hoosiers, this very inspiring basketball movie where the underdogs went all the way and won the championship. And we said, hey, it was the night before the game, we said, let's go watch Hoosiers to get inspired. Well, when we got there, this is hilarious. Guess who was in line right in front of us? O'Neill, right? They even beat us to the movie, right? So anyway, the game went as planned. Our coach had a really good strategy, and we had to slow the game down. We couldn't run with these guys and play a half-court game. Well, it actually worked. And we got to the fourth quarter, and we were neck and neck, back and forth. In the fourth quarter, I missed 6 free throws. We lost the game by 2 or 3 points. You can do the math. I was devastated. I got to, even thinking about it this week, it came back. It's incredible. Shame does funny things to us. I was devastated for a long time. Probably still am. If I went to my therapist this afternoon, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I would see these guys who we played against a lot over the years. We ended up playing together on different teams past high school. And for a long time, whenever I walked into the room or the gym where they were, my first thought was, I know what they're thinking. There's the guy that missed those free throws that cost the other team the game that day. I would drive past the high school, G.L. Roberts Collegiate. I would drive past it where the game was that day, and years later, these feelings would come back of shame, of regret, of pain. Shame can do funny things to us. Shame, as we think about it, has several truths. Shame is very personal. You may hear that story and think, well, what's the what's the big deal? Just missing a couple of free throws. It's just a basketball game. The stories of shame in your life, they might not have the same impact on me. Shame is very personal. It's different for each of us. A lot underneath that. Shame is more of a feeling than an intellectual truth. Like I know that a game is never decided when it's a team on one player. I've shared that message when I've coached kids. I know that intellectually. I know I made some free throws that day as well, and probably did some things that helped put us in that position. I could go on and on. Like there's intellectual truths that we know, but it doesn't take away the feeling of shame, no matter how true they are. Shame is more of a feeling than an intellectual truth. Shame is different from guilt. Jen talked a bit about in the children's time. Might be worth just thinking about that a little bit here as we enter in. Guilt or being ashamed is different from shame. Very, very different. Guilt is more about what we've done, where shame is who we are. So guilt would be, I made a mistake, and maybe I feel bad about it. Shame would be, I am a mistake. Right? Huge difference. Guilt would be, I screwed up. I messed up. Shame would be, I am a screw up. I am a mess up. And that's all I am. So shame and guilt are very different things. What we do versus who we are. So this is a big conversation. And if we want to talk about letting go of shame, the good news is probably by just having the conversation this morning, God is going to do some healing around shame. Just even talking about it, being open to it, is going to begin the process of healing. Psalm 34. I love Psalm 34, verses 4 and 5. This is in the Message translation. It says, God met me more than halfway. He freed me from anxious fears. Look at him. Give him your warmest smile. Never hide your feelings from him. There's something about sharing these feelings, even feelings of shame, where God meets us way more than halfway, takes away our anxious fears, and gives us a smile that can bring love instead of shame. That's just naming it. We're in a good place today. Wait, I agree with Debbie who said earlier, way to go to get here, especially to 9 o'clock this morning, daily time savings. Hope you didn't get tired, just me telling you that. Brene Brown, you can't talk about shame and not toss in a quote from Brene Brown. If you want to do more out of today, she's got all kinds of great wisdom and reflections on shame. But this one, this idea of just naming shame, we're in the right place. If we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, shame can't survive. Just naming it is the beginning of trying to bring some healing and letting go of shame. Let's move into some more scripture here this morning and look at a story and an individual who experienced what we're talking about here today. We're going to look at the story of Peter a little bit this morning, and I love Peter. You may have heard about Peter. Peter's one of the disciples of Jesus and a very strong leader. He would become, Jesus promises, he would become the rock on which he would build his church. And in many ways, when you read through Acts, he's instrumental in that. This happens before the beginning of the church, obviously, as he shares his life with Jesus, this story here. But Peter was often very outspoken around the Christian faith. He was bold. He would stand up and proclaim the gospel. He was just an incredible guy. And yet Peter is as human as any of us, because in this story, this is a story which Peter also is well known for. A story where he denies Jesus 3 times. And what's really interesting, even before we read the story, and it makes it even perhaps more true and even sadder in some ways, is that Jesus predicted this. Jesus said to Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. And Peter, of course, did what probably you and I would do. No, there's no way. I would never deny you, Jesus. And then he does. But we know about that, I think. It's partly being human. It's Romans 7, the Apostle Paul writes, it's so true. It's one of my favorite scriptures, but it's one that just becomes more and more real over the years. In Romans 7, the Apostle Paul basically says, the good that you want to do, the good that you intend to do, isn't what you're going to end up doing. You're going to end up doing that which you didn't want to do. And it's just sometimes so true. It's part of being human. I've experienced this, where people have made a suggestion, have warned me that I'm going to do something, and I've said, no. I just give you one example. Unfortunately, I could give you more than I'd like. The kids say to me, Dad, we know you're going to be late. No. I know I was last time, but I'm not going to. It happens. It's part of being human. That which we want to do, we don't always do. And so here we are in Luke chapter 22, verses 54 to 62. Check this out. The context, just so you know, Jesus has been arrested, and this is the time leading up to the crucifixion. So this is a significant time in Jesus' life. Again, here's Peter, in some ways the outspoken one, and look what happens. Even Peter. Arresting Jesus, they marched him off and took him into the house of the chief priest. Peter followed, but at a safe distance. Notice that already he's staying at a safe distance. I won't deny you, Jesus, but I'm going to stay at a safe distance. It's interesting, eh? The prediction is already starting to come true. In spite of Peter, in spite of the strong, bold leader, the deep man of faith that Peter is. In the middle of the courtyard, some people had started a fire and were sitting around it, trying to keep warm. One of the serving maids sitting at the fire noticed him, then took a second look and said, "This man was with him." He denied it. "Woman, I don't even know him." Shame. It's coming. A short time later, someone else noticed him and said, "You're one of them." But Peter denied it. Man, I am not one of them. About an hour later, there's even some time built in here. As I was reading the story this week, I was trying to make excuses for Peter. Maybe Peter denied, when Jesus said, "You're going to deny me 3 times." Maybe when Peter said he wasn't going, I'm not going to deny the same person 3 times. These are 3 different people. Exactly, it doesn't matter. Poor Peter. About an hour later, someone else spoke up, really adamant. He's got to have been with him. He's got Galilean written all over him. Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." At that very moment. The last word, hardly off his lips. A rooster crowed. Just then, the master turned and looked at Peter. Peter remembered what the master had said to him. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. He went out and cried and cried and cried. There's that moment in this story when Jesus looks at Peter. You could even imagine their eyes locking. Right? Interesting. I suspect for most of us, and this certainly happened at our staff meeting this week as we looked at this passage, our first reaction is, I know what's happened there. Jesus was looking at Peter with that look of disappointment, that look of tisk, tisk, that look that says, "I told you so." Because that's what shame does. That's what shame does, and shame is so deep in us as human beings. Maybe that's the look that we would give if we're being honest this morning. But Jesus, let's move back to think for a moment on who this is. This is Jesus. This is the one who will forgive the criminal who's going to be killed right beside him in just a number of hours. This is the one who would beg God to forgive those who would kill him. This is the one who invited Peter in, who said, "Come and follow me. I know who you are." Jesus already knew who he was, his strengths, his weaknesses. Jesus predicted this. He knew it was going to happen, if not because he knew all the details of Peter's life, because he knew who Peter was as a human being. And so perhaps, friends, the look that Jesus gave in that moment wasn't a look of shame, but a look of incredible love. A look that said, even though you can't forgive yourself right now, I've already forgiven you. A look that didn't intend to bring shame, but meant to bring a rescue, a restoration, a redeeming love that would eventually change Peter. In some ways, it doesn't matter what the look was. Peter still had to weep. We've been there. You know those moments? I know them all too well. When it's done, it's done. You can't go back and change it. You can believe me, you can wish with every bone in your body, with every fiber, every cell of who you are. You can wish that you hadn't said it. But it's too late. In reality, it's been done. That's over. What is, and so shame is very real. We feel the weeping part of the story as well. And in some ways it makes sense that Peter wept. That's how he felt. We'll come back to that look of Jesus as we think about the response to shame. Because maybe in those moments of shame, maybe that's when we're actually set up for grace. Maybe that's when God's best can actually happen. When we're so broken, we recognize there's no way we could do it on our own. Grace reminds us who we are. Grace reminds us that we're more than our mistakes. We're way more than our mistakes, even if that's how we feel at times. Grace brings not shame. Grace brings love. Grace brings redemption. Grace brings possibility. Grace brings growth that we could learn from this. Grace is like a green light. I think sometimes shame, I was thinking about it this week, especially when you're stuck in shame, when you're paralyzed by it. Shame would be like sitting at a red light for the rest of your life. Can you imagine? Oh, I hate getting red lights. I can't wait for them to turn green. Grace is that green light. So let's close this morning by really looking at some ways that we can let go of grace. Shame. Hold on to shame. Hold on to it. Oh. Okay, rewind. You guys know what I'm talking about. Okay, let's look at how we can let go of shame. We got a few here. The first would be to have the courage to name those places of shame. And I'm just going to want to make sure we're prepared for this. We're going to have an opportunity to do something with this. Just our worship team really felt like we needed to have some space to let the Holy Spirit work and respond today. And these little recipe cards that hopefully you got when you came in this morning, we're going to need these in just a few minutes. And it's nothing that you're going to have to do with them if you don't want to, but we would really love for everyone to have one. And so I would invite our team to come and just if you didn't get a recipe card this morning, they'd be glad to give you one. Some folks in blue shirts, some of our welcome teams here, even as we're talking. And just to let you in on, this isn't a secret, what we're going to do with this, if you're willing, and led this morning, is just to write down some of those places where you've experienced shame in your life. They may have already come to you this morning. You don't have to wait till we get to the exercise to write them down or think about them. That's what this card is for. But that's what's here, to have the courage to name the places of shame. Because when we don't have the courage to name them, what we do is we play this cosmic game of hide and seek. You know the story of Adam and Eve? Probably remember that one. They did some stuff that they shouldn't have done. They went against God's desire for their life. And when God shows up, what do? They try to hide. I mean, how funny. How do you hide from God? But that's what shame can do, funny things to us. So just naming it today, naming it in community, naming it in our small groups could be really important. That those can be places of healing, because there's something about naming it that allows some space for God to come and bring some healing. Confession could be the place where we are the closest to God, and we recognize our brokenness, even in confession. So simply, friends, to have the courage to name places of shame. And a lot of you knew what the topic was this morning, so I would say God's already started the healing process just by getting yourself here today, and just grateful for that. How about this? To be patient and know that it may take time. And we're talking about some deep stuff. And it may take time to find God's healing around it. The first time I went to a counselor, Katrina and I went after Lucas had passed away. And long story short, when we walked in, the counselor said, well, what are you expecting out of this? And I said, well, I would like you to make me better. If you could do it in 60 minutes, that would be perfect. Yeah. I felt bad for her after. I felt ashamed of that. Anyway, it's going to take some time, and that's okay. Number 3, try not to be paralyzed by your shame. And was really careful to say, try. Because even saying, don't be paralyzed by your shame, I just want to offer some grace in this conversation. But the other side of that is sometimes grace means go, and it leads us to action, and we need to do some things to get out of the pit of shame. One of my best friends, shared this earlier in the year, grew up together, known him all my life, had a massive heart attack over Christmas. We're trying to stay in touch. He lives in San Francisco, so every couple of weeks we're chatting on the phone. Last weekend I talked to him, and he's reached a tough spot because it's not an easy road to recovery. And talk about shame, you could feel it, but it was starting to paralyze him. And so, you listen for God's leading in these conversations, and you try to listen and try to offer some help wherever you can. And so it just felt moved to say this to him. I said, I think you need to exercise a 50-50 principle here. Or you need to give yourself at least 50%, some days more, graciousness. You're 2 months out of a life-changing event where you almost died. It's going to take a while at a whole bunch of levels to get where you want to be. This is a long-term decision you're making every day. Be gracious with yourself. But sometimes you may need to give yourself a kick in the butt. I didn't use butt because he's my friend. Some days you're going to have to challenge yourself to not eat that or to go for that walk or whatever you need to do, but try to do both at the same time, so try not to be paralyzed by shame. Leverage shame for good. And that may sound strange, and we could get in all kinds of definitions of shame. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's ashamed, but these experiences that we've had, sometimes they can lead to something better if we're open to that. Sometimes God can use it to bless and bring life. And so we can sometimes leverage shame, if you will. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Hidden Figures. Great movie. Oh my goodness. I stayed awake for her. And there's a scene, there's 3 amazing black women who are trying to work with NASA at a time where they weren't welcome, to be honest. And the one lady, she's just an incredible mathematician. She's working out formulas for them, but she can't do her job because she's not allowed in to the big meetings. And so they have this conversation with her supervisor, who's just he's not a good guy, and his boss, who's the real boss. And she says to the real boss, she says, I need to be in these meetings to be able to do the job that's going to get us there. And he says, well, why aren't you there? And she says, because the boss hasn't said I can be there, and you're the boss. You need to be a boss, sir. Sometimes, whether it's challenging others or challenging ourselves, shame can be used to keep us moving in the right direction. Know that God isn't done with you. Moses' story is incredible. Thumbnail sketch of Moses. At 40 years old, Moses screws up. He kills somebody. The Egyptian, even his own people turn against him. For 40 years, he lives in shame. And then God calls him at 80 years old to lead the people out of Israel. God's never done with us, friends. Never done. And finally, this is a deep one. We could do a whole series on this one. God says, Jesus says, that you do measure up. This one isn't even about anything we've done. It's all about who we are. And we go around with messages in our head that we say to ourselves, I haven't done enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. I don't measure up. And these feelings of shame that are very real, Christ came with a very different message. Came, born, gave of himself, gave of all of himself for something called love that assures us that we measure up before we've even done a thing. Here's a little video that one of our young adults sent me. I just loved it because I think it kind of dives into this one that we can quit trying to measure up. Watch this.
This is gonna make a lot of people sad and probably some happy, but I can't worry about that now. I quit. Fine, call me a quitter. I don't care. I just can't do this anymore. I've changed. You're not to blame. I'm just not the same person you knew before. So, not to be rude at all, but I'm done trying to live up to your expectations and down to them. Basically, I quit being bound to them. I quit following everyone's opinion of what's right for me. I quit holding myself back, living emotionally trapped, and not being who I'd like to be. I quit being loyal to these negative thoughts that have never been useful. I quit letting the guilt of my past get in my path and deprive me of a beautiful future. I quit letting people who have proven it they don't really care about me get to me. I quit hanging out with friends who on most days I couldn't tell you if they're friends or enemies, draining my energy. I quit letting society's expectations and timetables pressure me, direct my destiny and stress me. I quit forgiving everyone else in the whole world except me. I quit wanting the cool kids to accept me. I quit not saying what's on my mind at important times, letting fear come near and suppress me. I quit being so emotionally tied to the likes and shares of people I barely know online. I quit self-doubt and self-sabotage. I quit being a screw-up and a gonna-doer. I quit sleepwalking through life instead of living my dreams. I quit waiting for ducks to line up instead of spreading my wings. I quit not giving 100%. I quit dimming my light so that others won't have to squint. I quit peer pressure and people-pleasing. I quit the prison of perfection. I quit the fear of failure and the fear of success. I quit hesitation, desperation, expectations, devastations. I quit. And no, I don't have a 2-week notice, so please accept this as my letter of resignation. I know it seems sudden, but trust me, it has been a long time coming. But now, my time here's up. Oh, but don't worry. I'm grateful for the experience, and I have an amazing new life lined up. I quit. Hey guys, now that you know what I've quit to live.
So Jesus has said that we measure up. We're going to move in just a moment to these cards and just give us some time to write or think or pray about those places of shame that we want to bring forward in just a few moments and give them to God. I just want to close off the Peter story because it's important to know the follow-up to this denial thing. You see, in John 21, Jesus appears to Jesus on the beach. This is the resurrected Jesus. And they have this encounter, this incredible encounter, where Jesus asks him 3 times, do you love me? And all 3 times Peter says, of course I do, you know I do. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. So Peter is still going to be the one who Jesus is going to use to build his church. It's incredible. But it's interesting that the question only goes one way. Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? Of course the answer is yes. There's no questioning of Jesus. Peter saying, Jesus, do you love me? And do you know why? Because that was never in question. Friends, that's what we're talking about this morning. That's the power of grace. And so just want to take some time now to if you can write or think, use these cards. Maybe it's thinking about somebody who you've hurt over the years and they've come to your mind and heart this morning. You just want to seek forgiveness. And even if you're never going to be forgiven from them, to know that God has already forgiven you. That would be letting go of shame this morning. Maybe it's a mistake that you made a long time ago or even just recently that just is driving you crazy. Some free throws you missed a long time ago in a game that nobody even cares about anymore but you. Translate it for yourself. That would be worth writing down and letting go of that today by the power of God's grace. Maybe it's habits. Those pieces that Romans 7 sort of reminded you of this morning, that the good that I want to do isn't what I end up doing. There's these habits that I want to break, and maybe this isn't the process on how to break them, but it's certainly letting go of the shame that comes because you can't break them, so to write them down. It could be something in our world that we're a part of simply by being human that we don't like, that we are ashamed of. Poverty, environmental issues, racism, sexism. Just take a moment, friends, to do whatever with this that you need to do this morning. And then we'll process that. I'll tell you how we're going to do that in just a moment.